Welcome to this explainer. We usually picture our ancestors as these rugged pioneers conquering nature with sheer intellect. Well, the data actually tells a totally different story. We didn't conquer nature all on our own. Instead, we bypassed our, frankly, severe physical limitations by actively absorbing the traits of the animals around us.
Let's just dive right in. Imagine I drop you directly into the Pleistocene epoch. We're talking roughly 2 million years ago. Now take away our modern tools, our clothes, fire, shelter, the whole shebang. What are our actual chances of surviving out there in the wild? How exactly did the weakest ape manage to conquer the Earth?
When you really look at it, our baseline deficit was absolutely staggering. Just compare an early human to a Pleistocene apex predator. You've got saber-toothed cats with literally 6-inch canines and giant short-faced bears that could run down a horse. And us? No armor, no venom, paper-thin skin, and, let's face it, pretty slow. By every standard metric of evolutionary biology, we were pathetic. We were basically walking Happy Meals out there.
Now, the traditional narrative usually says, oh, our massive brains saved us. But building a bigger brain, that doesn't just magically happen in a vacuum. To understand how we survived being so physically vulnerable, we actually have to look inside the human head and understand the intense biological cost of that intelligence. Basically, we needed a serious caloric hack.
Because the biological math here is brutal. Our brain only makes up a tiny 2% of our total body weight, but get this, it demands a staggering 20% of our daily calories. It is an absolute metabolic monster.
And that brings us to a huge evolutionary hurdle known as the expensive tissue hypothesis. Biology lays down a rule. You cannot afford to power a massive gut, which you need to digest low-calorie plants, and a rapidly expanding brain at the same time. You can have the big gut to chew leaves all day like a gorilla, or the big brain to think, but definitely not both. So we couldn't just sit around eating tubers. We had to outsource our digestion to herbivores, the animals spending their whole lives turning indigestible grass into dense packages of fat and protein. But here's the crucial point. How did we actually get that energy? Remember, we weren't apex hunters yet. We were scavengers. So when a predator, like a lion, finished a kill, they'd leave the skeleton behind. To an early human armed with a heavy river stone, that stripped ribcage wasn't garbage. It was a locked treasure chest. By smashing open those abandoned skeletons, we scavenged the bone marrow inside. And marrow is essentially pure fat. That gave us the exact biological fuel we needed to upgrade our cognitive hardware, shrink our guts, and expand our minds.
Okay, so surviving the savannah was really just chapter 1. Fast forward to around 70,000 to 100,000 years ago. Migrating out of Africa meant this hairless, tropical ape suddenly faced a freezing glacial period. And we didn't have the thick fur of a mammoth or the dense blubber of a walrus. A hairless ape in that environment should have frozen to death in hours.
To bypass this completely new physical limitation, we did something incredible. We turned animals into our first industrial supply chain. We basically deconstructed them into a survival kit. The hide, that became our portable shelter. The stomach became a waterproof canteen for those dry, arid steppes. Antlers became leverage tools. We were taking the biological adaptations of other species and just repurposing them as our own external hardware. And honestly, maybe the most revolutionary piece of tech from this whole era was the carved bone needle. By combining that needle with animal sinew, the really tough tissue that connects muscle to bone, acting as a kind of thread, humans could actually stitch tailored, multi-layered clothing. We weren't just draping raw hides over our shoulders anymore. We bypassed our lack of fur by creating wearable microclimates. These thermal suits of animal skin are what let us conquer freezing tundras and high-altitude plateaus. We even took carved bone and antler to make armor-piercing projectile points. We literally turned the defensive weapons of our prey right back against them. But physical survival, staying warm, hunting, that was only half the battle. As humans pushed further into dark, completely unmapped, and potentially toxic continents, we faced a massive information deficit. We had no idea where the hidden water was, or which of the thousands of new plants would stop our heart in 10 minutes. So who did we ask for directions? Well, we tapped into animals as environmental hard drives. Millions of years of trial and error were already coded right into the local wildlife. Think about it. If you're lost in an arid landscape, you just follow the deep migratory routes of heavy herbivores. They acted like giant highways leading directly to hidden oases and seasonal lakes. And for food safety, we basically crowdsourced botanical intelligence.
By quietly watching which leaves the monkeys avoided, or noticing that local rodents wouldn't touch a specific seed, we used animals as our original poison testers. That trick alone saved countless lives.
We even learned to use them as a massive biological sensory network, entirely bypassing our own pretty dull senses. Early humans learned how to translate interspecies panic. If there was a sudden silence in the insect chorus, or if a whole flock of shrieking birds suddenly exploded out of the forest canopy, that was our early warning system. It meant a predator, like a cave lion, was nearby. We survived by plugging into a sensory network that was vastly superior to ours.
Eventually, though, just observing animals from a distance wasn't enough for us. So, somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 years ago, we decided to actively recruit one. And that decision led to a super high-stakes military alliance with the wolf, marking a really profound turning point in our whole evolutionary history.
This partnership was absolutely lethal, mostly because of how perfectly our traits merged together. See, humans brought incredible stamina, high intelligence, and projectile weapons so we could strike from a distance. The wolf, they brought a highly sensitive olfactory system to track invisible scent trails, night vision, and fast-twitch sprinting to corral the prey. By combining these complementary traits, we essentially created the most devastating hunting syndicate this planet had ever seen.
But the absolute greatest benefit the domesticated dog gave us didn't even happen during the day while we were hunting. It happened at night. Before dogs, an early human sleeping on the ground was incredibly vulnerable to nocturnal predators like hyenas and leopards. Our sleep was fragmented, it was light, we always had to keep one ear open. But dogs, they brought their territorial aggression and super sensitive hearing right into our camps. They acted as biological alarm systems that kept the darkness at bay.
And just knowing those dogs were standing guard allowed humans to do something incredible. We completely dropped our own guard. For the first time, we were able to fall into much longer, uninterrupted periods of deep REM sleep. And neurologically speaking, REM sleep is where the brain consolidates memories, forms complex connections, and really fosters creativity. By outsourcing our nighttime security to a former predator, we bought ourselves the neurological downtime required to become truly innovative. They quite literally gave us the peace of mind to dream. So, as our brains grew, our clothing improved, and our populations totally exploded, we eventually settled down, triggering the agricultural revolution. By domesticating livestock, we kind of created an infinite food glitch. However, settling into these massive, dense cities surrounded by thousands of animals unlocked a terrifying new threat: zoonotic diseases. These are pathogens that jump from animals to humans. We're talking measles from cattle, influenza from pigs and ducks. Now, in the short term, this was catastrophic. Around 10,000 years ago, animal-borne plagues caused massive population dips in these early cities. But roll the clock forward thousands of years later, and those urban survivors had passed on robust, resistant genes. Living right there in the mud with animals ultimately forged this invisible biological armor. So by the 15th century, when Eurasian explorers carrying the zoonotic immunity made contact with the Americas, where indigenous populations had very few domesticated animals and lacked that immunity, it sparked a tragic demographic collapse that completely reshaped the geopolitical trajectory of the whole planet. Looking back over all of this, an absolutely incredible pattern emerges. At every single point where early humans should have failed because of our physical limitations, an animal bridged the gap. We scavenged marrow to fuel our massive brains. We stole hides to survive the Ice Age. We borrowed the senses of local wildlife to navigate and stay safe. And we developed that zoonotic immunity for global survival. We didn't conquer nature, folks. We absorbed it. We borrowed the speed, the warmth, the senses, and the immune systems of the creatures around us, right up until we were strong enough to stand on our own. To put it perfectly, our bodies, our brains, and our societies are monuments to the creatures that died so we could live. We did not climb to the top of the food chain by ourselves, we were carried there. So, as we continue to shape the future of this planet, you really have to ask yourself, how different would human history be if we were truly alone in the wild?